Hey, what's going on guys? TheBrokenMachine here. Hope you're all doing well today. Welcome to my aim guide for Battlefield 2042. Lots of areas to discuss in this one. Sensitivity, snapping on targets, easier headshots, all of that good stuff. But first, before we begin, if you are not playing on a monitor, do make sure you set your TV to game mode. You'll find this in the picture or scene settings. What this essentially does is disables any extra image processing, which can help reduce input lag. Input lag, if you don't know, is the delay between the TV or monitor receiving a signal from your console or your PC and seeing that being displayed on your screen. The less, the better and more responsive your aim will feel. If you're on console or playing on PC with a controller, I'd also recommend playing over USB. Though it is unlikely to happen, any Bluetooth interference could affect your aim. Next, one of the best things you could do to improve your aim is to become more aware of where the center of your screen is. Knowing this will allow for a much easier time following targets and snapping onto them. Think of it like this. Great aim is really about being able to keep your target in the center of your screen. The better and quicker you know where the center is, the easier aiming and tracking your targets will be. To help improve on this, I'd highly recommend getting into the habit of aiming down sight at the start of every game, and after a while, you'll instantly know exactly where the center is, without even thinking about it. Think of it like this, you're not really tracking your targets with a weapon like in real life. What you're actually doing is trying to keep the target in the center of your screen. If you think about it like that, it makes a lot more sense. Now, let's talk about controlling recoil. Unfortunately, crouching or going prone does not reduce recoil in this game like it did in BF5, so I cannot recommend you do either of those unless you're hoping to throw your opponent's aim off. Particularly going prone, drop shotting in this game isn't very effective, so I wouldn't recommend using it too often unless you're about to die and it's the only way you might get out of this situation. Now, recoil patterns are pretty predictable to some extent. On screen here, you can see how they are very similar. A little bit different each time, but there is a pattern going on here. It's a good idea to head over to the solo breakthrough mode at the main menu, decide on any map you like, and give each weapon a go. Try countering your weapon as best as you can and see where your weaknesses are. I wouldn't recommend trying to control for the entire magazine. Often you want to be tap firing and burst firing. Unless you are staring down a corridor full of enemies, you don't really want to be completely mag dumping every engagement. If you haven't dropped your opponents by 10, maybe even 15 bullets at most, do readjust and try again. I'd highly recommend switching to single fire by aiming down sight and having a play with how the weapon feels too. Some players, they actually find they are much better off with single fire and tap firing. Personally, that's not really the case for me. I can do it, but I'm not one of those super fast tap firing players. But you might want to try it. Some people, it works for them and they run around the map tap firing, never really mag dumping, or they can even mag dump by tap firing. It's crazy. So you might want to have a go of that. Sensitivity is a massive part of your aim. Highly recommend you do stick with one setting and don't change it. Many new players make the mistake of constantly changing their sensitivity. By doing this, you are ruining muscle memory that you've built over time. Don't be that player, stick with one sensitivity and only ever change after you notice improvements at the game and realize you actually need to change your sensitivity. For example, let's say your aim is really polished, really good, nice and confident, but you just don't have the turn speed to really snap onto some targets, particularly in close range engagements. That may be the time to adjust your sensitivity, but again, only when you are confident. You don't want to mess up that muscle memory if you're a new player. 30 to 50% sensitivity is totally fine for most controller players. I use 100, but I wouldn't recommend that for any new players. It is very, very high. If you're on PC, you should use a sensitivity the same as other games you can play. I'll put a link down below to a website where you can convert your mouse sensitivity from game to game. Much more can be found on sensitivity settings in my guide, which is also linked below. I would also highly recommend you turn on uniform soldier aiming so that all weapons and sights feel the same. Essentially, with this enabled, if you turn 90 degrees right with a sniper scope and then do the same with a pistol, both will feel the same in terms of sensitivity. Do check out my full settings guide for more on that. There is more discussion on what coefficient works best here. Honestly, I'd recommend default if you've always used it in previous titles or if you're new to the game. If you are using a controller, do make sure you turn off vibration. Also, make sure you turn off any acceleration. You don't want that. Essentially, acceleration will make it so that your aim isn't one-to-one. Basically, there's going to be some acceleration. If you try to aim to a certain point, it's not going to quite get there as quickly as you may anticipate. There is some fixes that I'm going to put on screen right now for mouse users. There is some issues with the current settings in Battlefield 2042, where your aim might not be as good as it should be. So do make sure you have a play of those. I tried them and they worked for me. Definitely recommend. Next, let's talk about the mindset that you really need. You should be constantly asking yourself where you're aiming at and why. Why are you aiming towards the floor? What if someone is inside? Why the ceiling? There's not going to be anybody there. What is the point? You should always be trying to aim where enemies could come from. It is a much better strategy than staring at the floor. This is often referred to as centering. Centering is where you aim where your opponents could be, so as soon as they pop up, you begin the fight with an advantage. Take this situation here. We've all entered a building like this. If you aim too close to the wall or at the ceiling or at the floor and someone is inside, they are going to have a massive advantage over you. So if you aim properly as you come around the corner where they could be, you are more likely to win the gunfight. Another example, watch how I move around the map here. I'm looking for enemies in each corner. Very simple, but incredibly effective. You'll be much more ready for a gunfight, and if there is someone there, maybe the head glitching, sitting behind an object, whatever it may be, you'll have a slight edge, hopefully a slight edge in that gunfight, and you'll take them out. Do take a note of the streaks that you've seen on my channel. Next time you watch them, you should see me centering quite often. I am quite an aggressive player. Sometimes it doesn't always work, and there is some situations where the centering, you're not sure where exactly you should be looking at because it's just a busy area and it's not always perfect. But overall, you should see me doing this live. If you can't see it, go back, listen to what I said again, and you should be able to. Obviously, you can't center all the time, but it is definitely a good habit to get into. It'll make engagement so much easier in the long run. And it's just a good habit overall. I'm often seeing so many players just staring at the ground, staring into the sky. What are you looking at? There's no point. You should always be looking in the direction where potentially enemies can come from, so you're ready for them, so you have that little edge against them, that advantage. And if you do this often, you'll just naturally improve your aim because you're consciously thinking about it. You're not just running around and then you get into a gunfight, you lose it, you win it, maybe, don't know, 50-50. You're actually improving your aim by being conscious about it. Aim isn't just about being in gunfights, it's what you do before them that makes such a difference. Think of it like this: if you want to improve racing, going around a track and dominating on it, you don't turn up on race day and hope you win it. You practice, you go around the track, you learn the corners, the braking spots, what you need to do here and there, all of these different things. So when it comes to race day, you're in a much better position to win that race. It's the same with aim. If you're aiming in the right spots all the time, when someone appears, you'll have the advantage. And if you're constantly being conscious about it, overall in the long term, you'll be a much better aimer. Probably ranted a bit long there, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. Now, anticipating enemies could be done by aiming down sight around a corner or while waiting for a target. Definitely both wise moves there. Just make sure you're not aiming too close to an object, otherwise it may block your shot. Centering is also often referred to as placing your targets on your opponents before you shoot. Definitely recommend getting into the habit of doing this. Obviously, as your skill increases, you won't need to do this as much, but it's a good thing to start off with. A good way to improve this aspect of centering is to go into your own solo breakthrough server with the following map. Head over here and work on your centering with the AI targets here. Snap to them, try and line them up in your crosshair, and keep doing this over and over again until you feel much more confident. Try to place them in the crosshair, then aim down sight and then shoot. Rinse and repeat, and over time, you'll become a much better player. Simply lining them up in the crosshair and then firing straight after, or aiming down sight and firing straight after, is such an easy way to improve your aim. Also here, you can soon improve your snapping on targets. It is good to be snapping here and there, but do try this. Try to drift your aim. It's hard to explain, but I find personally not being so snappy and allowing my aim to drift to a target tends to work out much better. It's hard to explain this one, but if you see my gameplay, a lot of people comment on it, on how the aim is quite smooth and not always quite snappy all the time. And honestly, this is just kind of like my preferred style. It just works for me. Some people are very mechanical. They just snap to targets left, right, and center. And for me, that's not really how I play. I can do it, but I find smooth, slower, kind of more kind of drifty is the only way I can really explain it. Those kind of movements just work for me. Personally, I actually find that if I'm really snappy, I often over aim or under aim unless I'm really under pressure. I don't know what it is, but when I'm under pressure, my aiming is so much better, and just my gameplay in general, my game sense, my awareness, my decision making when I'm under pressure is just vastly improved. So another thing I like to do when I'm trying to, when I'm trying to get out of a slump and improve my aim, particularly when it comes to a new game, I like to just rush in and just try and go crazy. That's where I really succeed. I'm not the kind of player who sits at the back of the map and can track targets very, very well at range. But if there's 5 snipers looking at me, yeah, that's the situation. When I'm under pressure, my aim just goes into overdrive. I don't know if that's the case with you guys, but you should try. You should see where you kind of mentally have an advantage. You might find yourself actually succeeding and being a much better player in more difficult situations. Some people don't, but it's worth looking into. Anyway, pre-aiming can give you a massive advantage. Definitely recommend you pre-aim as much as possible. This is called centering as well, and we talked about it briefly. Take a common situation like this, pre-aim, center, and you're ready to go. Don't pre-aim and you have to rely on reactions. Never a good idea. The idea of centering or pre-aiming is essentially to get you better at preparing for a battle and thinking more about where your next opponents could be. You see, aiming isn't just about your control with your mouse or controller, it's about the mental game, especially when it comes to tracking your targets. You need to work on knowing the mechanics of the game so you can interpret the situation coming next. In other words, you can predict where your opponents will move. In every game you play, you want to be taking note of how players move, how quick they go from crouch to standing, how they slide, how fast they travel, basically everything about the way they can move in the game. The goal is to use that information and visualize their movement in advance. Now, if you can do that every single session, game to game, streak to streak, eventually you'll just know how players move and won't even think about it, and tracking will become much, much easier for you. For me, I don't really think about it anymore. I'm always looking to tidy up my aim, of course, but movement, players' movement, this isn't something I really think about too much anymore. And if you really want to improve your aim, that's where you got to get to. You've got to be able to just predict targets. And most of it, yes, it's about how you can move your mouse or your controller, but really it's about how well you can predict where your opponent is going to be. And I repeat, where your opponent is going to be. That is so important. Keep that in mind. Now, being able to track targets is a massive part of good aim, but the real key is visualization. If you know what could happen next, you'll be more prepared and likely to win the battle. We could sit here and analyze tons of situations over and over. It may help some, but the reality is just keep it simple. If you see an enemy running towards a building, they're probably going to try and get inside, so be prepared for that movement. Easy. If you see an enemy behind an object, they'll probably pop up in the same place. Expect it. Also, polishing up your aim, I do recommend standing still for medium to longer range targets. To get an accuracy bonus when it comes to headshots, maybe aim for the neck. If you aim too high on the head, you could easily miss, but if you aim for the neck, if you're aiming a little too low, you'll probably still get a body shot, or you might even get the headshot. So do try to stick with the neck for now until you get a little better at the game. Highly recommend you avoid going for headshots all the time. Honestly, it's not really worth it. Also, your crosshair color may have an impact on your aim overall. I do recommend trying different colors. A nice bright green is fairly easy to track. Even a nice pink or purple is really good. Some people prefer something subtle, maybe a dark red, a black, or even the default white. Do have a go and try many and see what works for you. You might not realize just how much a decent crosshair color can affect your aim, but it really does. No, make sure you turn off this setting in the settings in game. Also, this may sound stupid, but do make sure you're actually looking through the iron sights or reticle of your weapon. It sounds stupid, I know, but seriously, spend a whole game actually looking through every time you aim at an enemy, and you'll notice a difference straight away. Sometimes, you know, we do go on autopilot and we forget these things. We kind of get into a groove and our aim suffers. So from time to time, I would recommend just spending a little bit more time actually really staring through that reticle or that sight. Also, lastly, a great tip when it comes to the mental game, just aim. Don't think about it, just aim. See a target, just aim. Thinking about it often gets in the way. Of course, you want to analyze your aim, up in that head of yours, try and improve it, but not too much. You don't need to all the time. Often, you don't have time to think too much about it. Just aim down sight, take your shots, and in time, you will improve just by doing it. Just do it. Just aim. Anyway, lastly, headshots are incredibly valuable in 2042. Do recommend going for them if you can, but not always, of course. Do remember, it is about dropping your opponents as fast as you can. If aiming to the head is going to take you longer, or you've got to aim quite far on the screen, then just going for body shots might be the way to go. So if you can line up the head, do it. But if it's going to take you half a second to go from the ground to the head, don't bother. It's not worth it. If it's going to take you 100 milliseconds to do that change, in that 100 milliseconds, you probably could have taken out the person in front of you. Before we go, there are various settings on console that will drastically improve your aim. Highly recommend checking out my guides for those up in the corner there. Plenty of options for PC as well. If you are on PC, do make sure you turn off vertical sync in your settings. If you're on PC, trust me, you need to. Lots more to discuss on this topic, of course, but this I feel is good for now. Some different ideas here, not just purely settings, and I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Do drop a like and a share if you do. More tutorials on the channel, of course, and I appreciate your support. Click that join button if you'd like to support my channel even further. Take it easy, guys. Catch you later.